Tanking dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV. What does it feel like from the perspective of a newcomer to the game? Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Gyro, I'm your host here. Particularly warm welcome to you if you're new here. I'm a veteran of World of Warcraft and a very experienced tank coming into Final Fantasy XIV and learning the ropes of the game, new classes and so on and so forth. You're most welcome here and to join our little club if this sounds like your cup of tea. Today I will be sharing my opinion and my impressions from tanking ARR, A Realm Reborn dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV. As I already said, I believe that I'm fairly well qualified tank generally in MMORPG space, coming from a game that mechanically is quite similar to Final Fantasy XIV, but yet quite different. We've discussed it at length in my previous videos. I do recognize that Final Fantasy XIV is quite different, and this video primarily is directed at people who are similar to me, who perhaps are coming into the game as newbies, as potentially people who want to try tanking, or who simply want to adjust their playstyle and their expectations from the game based on what they've experienced in the past. So there is quite a lot of adjustment to be had in this game, and I love Final Fantasy XIV. It's my new home, and all I'm trying to do here is not pose as some sort of an expert of tanking classes of Final Fantasy XIV, but I do have a very educated perspective on how tanking feels. So let's jump straight into this if this is something that you're interested in, and I'm happy to take you on this little discovery journey with me. What is different about tanking in Final Fantasy XIV? Quite a few things, but we are going to focus on only a few most important components today. What different is threat generation, how your tanking class of choice works in Final Fantasy XIV, including things like global cooldown affected abilities versus those that are off global cooldown, and your mitigation abilities specifically. How healing works and how healers generally play this game. Yes, it's affecting your tanking directly. It's affecting your tanking. Dungeon navigation and managing the dungeon map. And finally, the people, players of Final Fantasy XIV that you'll be grouping with. So let's briefly jump into threat generation, a question of this. I'm sure every class or job in Final Fantasy XIV is different, so I am only talking from my limited experience of playing Gladiator and becoming a Paladin, and from what I've seen so far in A Realm Reborn. Tanking threat is generated in Final Fantasy XIV by you entering a specific stance, or simply using an ability that gives you a certain buff that puts, this very specific UI element on the screen, that there is no chance of you missing it, and it will be increasing enmity. It's basically threat, aggro generation for you, yeah? When that thing is on, you are tanking and your offensive abilities are attracting enemies to you. When this thing is off, you are generating a lot less threat. It's very, very binary and very, very simple. I quite like it. So if you're planning to tank, first you need to get to level 10, where most tanking classes, I assume, would learn their respective version of this threat generating ability or stance, and then get used to turning it on before entering your first dungeon that should unlock for you around level 15. Now about your tanking class. That is obviously a very important thing to adjust to, start learning and start getting used to. This once again does not pose as an end-to-end guide for Paladins or tanking classes as a whole. We might revisit this later when I have put a few extra dozen hours into this game and I have learned a little bit more to speak in a more educated way. But for beginners, for people who are shifting from World of Warcraft, let's say, to Final Fantasy XIV, this hopefully would be enough. So as I've reached the end of ARR around level 51 on my main job of a white mage, I've decided to prioritize fun of trying tanking, because I love tanking, over pushing for further main story questline progression, and I switched to Gladiator, becoming a Paladin at level 30. So judging by two job selections that I've made in this game so far, those selections of jobs essentially, so like extension of your class at level 30, they just add extra abilities, but they do not change the feel and how you got used to playing your selected class dramatically anyway. It doesn't change anything. So becoming a white mage simply added more powerful abilities to my conjurer, put simply. And becoming a paladin did the same thing for my gladiator, and as you can see, at least at the moment of recording of this video, I can see the abilities. I had a chance to kind of take a look at them, properly analyze them for what it's worth, but I haven't had a chance to yet activate all of them and reach the level when I could play with all of them. But we can see exactly where it's going, I think. Like a lot of you said that a very solid, kind of can't go wrong type of all-round tanking class would be a paladin. So I took that advice and I went for it, and it just happens to be that in World of Warcraft my favorite tank of choice remains Protection Paladin. This one, so far, plays quite differently to, you know, World of Warcraft Protection Paladin, but has elements that remind me of a Paladin from World of Warcraft quite a lot, and in a very, very good way. So first of all, you need to get used to that your Gladiator / Paladin in Final Fantasy XIV is going to be straight away with most of your attacks being single target, not offering you much splash, unless you're using something like Total Eclipse ability that you will learn at level 6, and it seems to me like nothing special. It's just, imagine that it's a World of Warcraft's Warrior's Whirlwind ability hitting everyone around you, and look, seemingly helping me to get attention of multiple smaller adds if I get myself into that situation. Pool something in a dungeon, there are 4 mobs, I want to immediately get their attention, you know, my Iron Will gauge is on and I am doing this attack whirlwind basically around them. I use this ability fairly sparingly. Secondly, there is a concept of combos in this game that you'll be introduced to, surely, you will see that. You basically use one ability, one basic ability usually, and then another one lights up as either empowered to do more damage or having special effects attached to it, such as stun. So your typical rotation at this early level range is going to be revolving around chaining those combo abilities as much as you can to do as much damage as you can. So obviously maintaining threat and contributing to the DPS of your group. That's about it. That's what you need to keep in mind. There is a very decent amount of stuns available to you straight away, which is very different to World of Warcraft. Yes, we have stuns, but, you know, stuns that we had as Paladins in World of Warcraft, they are on 1 minute cooldown or something like that. Here, you can pretty much use the stun on a very, very short cooldown, like 2 seconds or something, and they're super duper handy to mitigate the incoming damage because you're stopping the enemies in their tracks. That's fantastic. So Shield Bash, in my case, is learned very, very early, and it does a massively long stun to the enemy, something like 4-6 seconds. It's an eternity. It feels like an eternity by my World of Warcraft standards, okay? There are diminishing returns to stuns, obviously, so if you keep shield bashing, because the cooldown is very low, so you are tempted to keep bashing, you're not gonna stun lock the enemy. I think the enemy starts fully ignoring your stun after about 3rd time you use the ability on it, like if you go back-to-back abilities. To be obviously corrected by my more experienced tanks in the comments below, please. I do invite, as always, your suggestions and corrections here. So I am learning, but this I think is not too far off the truth to share with my World of Warcraft migrant fellow friends. Your main damage mitigation abilities are either that proactive stun that you probably should use a lot, you know, to stop the enemy from doing what they're doing, or to use something like Rampart ability on a 1.5 minute cooldown that reduces incoming damage by 20. There are a lot more damage mitigation abilities such as Reprisal and Sentinel that you will learn soon enough too as you level up, and becoming a Paladin also unlocks this roadmap of currently not activated abilities. You will see them in your ability list, but they will be grayed out until a certain level when you learn them, and a lot of them also will allow you to mitigate the damage. So there's a ton of damage mitigation basically on this class, which is fantastic to see. And final thing to say here is that yes, you can throw a shield, which is fun and generates some extra threat. So majority of your pools will start with that, reminding you of World of Warcraft Protection Paladin. But the shield doesn't bounce between the targets. It doesn't silence them. So basically it's a bit of a poor man's replica of what we fell in love with in WoW. But you know what? Ah well, it's better than having nothing, I guess, and it does bring me back a little bit to that mindset of a WoW protection paladin. Don't listen to purists who will tell you you are supposed to forget everything that you've learned after over 15 years. Good luck, my friends, good luck. Be realistic. We won't forget everything. It's nice for us to associate something with some familiar aspects of play that we're familiar with from other games. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, getting used to you as a tank and your interaction with healers. It's very, very important. Healers try and do bare minimum of healing in this game. Let's just call it for what it is. Hoping that you will survive on your own and expecting you to survive on your own for quite some time. And they try and DPS as much as they can. Being a tank and even using mitigation abilities, I feel somewhat uncomfortable seeing my health drop below 50% before your somewhat more educated healer, and I ran with quite a few now, starts throwing heals on you. Up to your like half health is gone, they kind of don't bother to top you up. For me, this is a very, very serious thing to get adjusted to, and if, for what it's worth, I can preempt your frustration and I can tell you right now that that's what you should expect, maybe you will panic less, maybe it will be okay for you, maybe you'll feel better about all this. Now, dungeon navigation. Dungeon navigation is always scary at first and probably accounts for like 50% of average players' fear to assume the role of a tank and the anxiety, the tanking anxiety, because you kind of have to lead the group along, don't you? Well, what I've done in Final Fantasy XIV is I created a macro that I just click when I get into a new dungeon and it posts into the party channel a little chat, little string of text that I am still trying to learn the dungeons and would appreciate some patience, or the others are most welcome to assume the role of a leader and lead the way. That's my disclaimer and I leave it at that. So you might want to do that too. It kind of helps me to set the scene, and then if people choose to ignore it, whatever, nobody has so far. It kind of is it's how I deal with it. I've dealt with navigation issues also by opening the map and keeping it open until I feel like I've learned the dungeon path, more or less. The map is not very clear, you know, at least in these early dungeons. And some people even made fun, like I didn't even prompt it and they said, oh, good on you navigating this is the worst dungeon in the whole game. And I'm like, okay, that is about Deepcroft. They were saying that about Deepcroft in case you're interested. So some rooms might have a pin in them that would visually sort of taunt you, and you'd think as a tank, as a new tank, you'd think I need to go there, but you don't need to go there. And I had to rely on actually suggestions coming from my fellow people in the dungeon who would lead me along, who would tell me actually how to navigate. Otherwise, how would I find out? No idea. This kind of leads us to the conversation about people and the group members. So as I've said numerous times already in the other videos, I'm actually very impressed in general with Final Fantasy XIV community. In the game and outside of the game, in the comments to my videos. With majority, vast majority of you guys and girls anyway. People are generally a lot more helpful, friendly, and most importantly patient than we would have expected in World of Warcraft. As I've said above, in my opinion, 50% of tanking anxiety could be attributed to not knowing the dungeon and not knowing where to go. Well, the other 50% probably goes to many of us being fearful to deal with impatient and toxic people, who will criticize and slam us for being slow, tanks, bad healers, whatever, you know? So while these people obviously know better, yet choose to play pew-pew DPS roles. Yeah, I love you, guys and girls. Well, human factor is always present in these kind of games, and even in the best communities there are always some impatient smart asses who know better and give you a hard time. Final Fantasy XIV, however, is so much better than World of Warcraft on that aspect, at least from the tanking perspective. That is what I can assure you of from my experience, so please relax. I am yet to see a situation where people would get impatient or rude with me for being a noob tank after I've especially used that macro and announced in the party chat at the start of the dungeon that I am open to suggestions, etc. Yeah, so it's really not a problem in here, and probably this is my most positive impression from tanking in Final Fantasy XIV so far. The rest of impressions are also very positive. You know, Dungeons are okay. I've seen a few right now. Obviously as a healer I've gone a lot further than this, and as a tank now I tanked, you know, a dozen probably. I'm getting used to the layout of the maps, boss mechanics are very basic so far, and if your healer doesn't think that they are the main uber DPS of the group and remember to heal you, then you will be fine. Just get out of something that you can avoid, like clearly telegraphed area damage on the ground, ASAP, don't wait, because Final Fantasy XIV visuals are a little bit deceiving, and if you think that you still have time to dodge the damage at the very last second, you might not be able to, and the damage will still be dealt to you because the alignment of the damage distribution versus the visual cue on the ground is not perfectly aligned. That's my discovery so far. Everything else is literally tanking 101, which this video isn't supposed to be a guide for. It's not supposed to teach you every basic mechanic of tanking. You grab the mobs, you watch for your healer being in range, you don't run off like an idiot, and you will be fine. So these are my impressions from the early game tanking in Final Fantasy XIV, based on the dungeons that I've tanked. Overall, it's very enjoyable, it's a role that I enjoy the most. It's different to WoW, but similar in a good way. You know, the rest of the game is also very different, but close enough to feel like there is a familiar role to feel and enjoy the game in the process. Any questions? Ask me in the comments. Any feedback? Post your walls of text in the comments. I love reading those. It takes me a few days to get through all of them, but I read everything. And I comment to everything I can physically comment to, so please keep them coming. And subscribe for more similar impression videos if you like my content. And I'll be speaking with all of you again in a few days' time about something else, Final Fantasy XIV related, no doubt. See you later. Bye for now.